My name is Ethan Caldwell, and during my pursuit of an MC degree in chemistry in graduate school, I crossed paths with Melissa. From the moment I saw her, I was captivated. It took about 6 months for her to feel the same way, just before she earned her MA in art history. But eventually, she reciprocated my feelings, and it was worth the wait. Although neither of us had much experience in relationships, I found our intimate life fulfilling, and Melissa never voiced any complaints. Less than a year after she graduated with her MA, we tied the knot and secured jobs in the same city. She began teaching at a community college, while I worked part-time at a state university and split the rest of my time with a science consulting firm. After 3 years of marriage, I decided to leave the university and committed full-time to consulting, specializing in explosives. One of my major clients was the federal government. When our first daughter, Sophia, was born, my government-related work required significant travel. I knew this was hard on Melissa, and I even proposed switching to a full-time teaching position at a local college, which had offered me roles several times. However, Melissa valued the financial security my consulting job provided and the comfortable lifestyle it afforded us. Her frequent reassurance was always, "I'm self-sufficient. I can handle it." 2 years after Sophia's birth, we welcomed our second daughter, Emily. Despite the added family responsibilities, my travel schedule remained packed. Once again, I suggested changing my career to something more stable, but Melissa encouraged me to stick with consulting, knowing it benefited us financially. When our daughters were 5 and 7, my travel load decreased, allowing Melissa to return to work. She found an administrative role at the local university, primarily working with the liberal arts college. Though I never fully understood her passion for this position, I didn't question it since it clearly brought her joy. Around this time, Melissa developed a strong interest in photography, amassing over a dozen photo albums filled with cherished memories of our family. Her curiosity didn't stop there. Melissa also became fascinated with foreign languages, particularly Italian. She often traveled for work, mainly to Chicago, where she attended meetings with donors, visiting professors, and events at the Art Institute. On occasion, she also visited Clara, a college friend and former Italian exchange student who had settled in Chicago. When Sophia was 8 and Emily was 10, global terrorist threats surged, making my expertise highly sought after by the federal government. I was recruited for a demanding 2-year assignment, requiring even more travel and sometimes month-long absences. Before accepting, I had a long discussion with Melissa, as the extended time away would undoubtedly strain our family. She assured me they would manage, saying, "We'll miss you, but the girls and I can handle it." The assignment required me to be away for 2 consecutive Christmases, which broke my heart. During this time, Melissa took Sophia and Emily to visit Clara in Chicago. I stayed connected with them through daily phone calls, and they seemed happy. Clara's family, including children close in age to our daughters, made their visit enjoyable. After over 2 years of aiding counterterrorism efforts, I returned to full-time consulting with much less travel. Melissa continued her monthly trips, usually 2 or 3 days at a time, mostly to Chicago. When she was away, I happily managed all parenting duties for Sophia and Emily, though they occasionally accompanied her on these trips. As the girls grew older, they naturally became closer to Melissa, confiding in her more often than me. While this didn't bother me much, I did notice that they were particularly secretive about their trips to Chicago. They never voluntarily shared stories about their time there, and often deflected when I tried to ask, turning the conversation into a playful joke. When Emily turned 18 and headed off to college out of state, and Sophia was a junior at another out-of-state school, Melissa went through a dark emotional phase. On multiple occasions, I found her in tears. Melissa explained that becoming an empty nester had been weighing heavily on her and suggested a quick shopping trip to Chicago with Sophia and Emily. The trip came together on short notice, requiring several lengthy phone conversations with Clara, all in Italian. Since I didn't understand the language, I accepted Melissa's version of the details without question, though I noticed she was unusually emotional leading up to their departure. When she returned from Chicago 3 days later than planned, Melissa seemed in better spirits, though she hadn't entirely returned to her usual self. What caught me off guard was the surprisingly small number of items they brought back from the supposed shopping spree. When I asked about it, she casually mentioned that some of the purchases were being shipped directly, including packages sent to Sophia and Emily's college addresses. Around this time, I noticed a marked improvement in our intimate life. While we'd never had significant issues, apart from the strain caused by my extended absences, this positive change coincided with Emily leaving for college. I attributed it to us rekindling our connection as empty nesters and enjoying a newfound closeness. Then came the pivotal moment in my story. One Thursday, I decided to take an unplanned break from work around noon. Without notifying Melissa, who was at her office as usual, I initially planned to play a quick 9 holes of golf. However, a sudden downpour ruined that plan. Instead, I began preparing for our upcoming anniversary and decided to surprise Melissa with a celebration. To bring my idea to life, I met with an event planner in the early afternoon. At around 3 p.m., a delivery man arrived with a large wooden crate labeled fragile. Using a dolly, he carefully hauled it up the front steps and into our living room. The crate was addressed to Melissa, and after signing for it, we placed it upright, ensuring that this side-up label was correct. The delivery immediately struck me as odd. I couldn't imagine what it might contain. Curious, I examined the return address. Bellini Photography Studios, located in the heart of Chicago. I decided to call Melissa at work to inform her about the unexpected delivery. Her reaction was peculiar. She fell silent for several moments, then curtly explained that the crate was related to her work and was supposed to have been sent to her office. She mentioned she'd planned to have it moved there the next day. Though her explanation seemed plausible, 3 things didn't sit right. First, her unusual silence on the phone. Melissa was rarely at a loss for words. Second, the sharp, almost commanding tone in her voice when she told me not to open the crate. Third, the underlying stress that seemed to creep into her demeanor. Intrigued, I decided to take photos of the crate and the shipping label, then entered the address of Bellini Photography Studios into my laptop for research. When Melissa returned home that evening, she immediately inspected the crate, her eyes scanning it intently as if searching for signs of tampering. When I casually asked what was inside, she became evasive and defensive, insisting she needed to check it at her office to assess for damage or potential insurance issues. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 maintenance workers from Melissa's college arrived with a van to transport the crate under her supervision. When I tried to express enthusiasm about what I assumed was an upcoming school exhibition, I was really testing Melissa's reaction. Her response was shifty. She avoided eye contact and vaguely replied that she wasn't sure if that was the purpose of the delivery, but she would let me know if anything was decided. This hesitation and her uncharacteristic stuttering only heightened my suspicions. Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa didn't mention the crate or its contents at all, which only added to my unease. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching Bellini Photography Studios in depth. What I found was fascinating. The studio was the U.S. arm of the globally renowned photographer Marco Bellini, a name I vaguely recognized but knew little about. Strangely, despite Melissa's frequent discussions about artists and photographers, both for her photography hobby and her university work, she had never mentioned Marco Bellini before. Marco Bellini had a highly distinctive style, blending the realism of traditional photography with striking artistic effects. His mastery extended across techniques such as bokeh, motion blur, panning, the rule of thirds, and long exposures, often combining several effects in a single piece. But what truly set him apart was a signature effect named after him, Bellini's artistic mastery. This effect was incredibly difficult to describe. At its core, it transforms some elements of a photo into hyper-realistic depictions while rendering adjacent features with a dreamlike fuzziness, shifting colors and shades even within the same object. Words simply couldn't capture its essence. It was something you had to see to truly appreciate. While much of what I uncovered about Marco Bellini was intellectually and artistically fascinating, 2 shocking facts leapt out at me. First, the person managing administrative affairs at his studio was none other than Clara Bellini Vianelli, a friend of Melissa's whom I had only met once, never in Chicago, and always known by her married name, Clara Vianelli. Second, Marco Bellini had tragically died in a car accident on September 1st of the previous year. His memorial service had been held in Chicago on September 6th, before his body was transported to his family's burial plot in Italy. The timing of this revelation hit me hard. Melissa's sudden emotional state around September 2nd, supposedly due to becoming an empty nester, now felt suspicious. Coupled with the shopping trip to Chicago from September 5th to 8th with our daughters, the dates lined up too conveniently. Despite the crushing realization, the pieces fit together far too well. The only plausible conclusion was that Melissa had been in a secret relationship with Marco Bellini for at least a decade, and that Sophia and Emily had likely known about it. Adding to the intrigue, I discovered that a Chicago exhibition showcasing Marco Bellini's most celebrated works, including private collections and never-before-seen pieces, was scheduled for April 16th through 18th, just 3 weeks away. The exhibition almost certainly featured the contents of the mysterious crate delivered to our house. Given the coincidence, I was certain Melissa would fabricate another business trip to attend, even though April 18th was my birthday. Fueled by anger and betrayal, I felt an unparalleled determination to confront my unfaithful wife and my seemingly complicit daughters. To execute my plan, I first had to temper my initial rage and focus on gathering proof. On the night I uncovered these revelations, I arranged an impromptu business trip and booked a 3-night stay at a local hotel. I left Melissa a heartfelt voicemail, apologizing for leaving so suddenly and promising to make it up to her soon. The plan. Part 1. Secure legal representation and prepare divorce papers. I reached out to Margaret Kane, a highly recommended divorce attorney. She was thorough and efficient, advising me on the necessary steps. While she suggested citing irreconcilable differences, she agreed to pursue long-standing infidelity as grounds if I could provide sufficient proof. Margaret promised that once I delivered the evidence, she would have the divorce papers ready to serve Melissa on the morning of April 17th. To make the service more impactful, she arranged for a private process server and a law enforcement officer to ensure everything went smoothly. Part 2. Obtain evidence from the Chicago exhibition. To gain insight into the event, I began researching art appraisers in Chicago with connections to the photography world. After some digging, I found Alessandro Moretti, a young, ambitious appraiser eager to establish himself. I traveled to Chicago and spent nearly an entire day speaking with him. Confident that Alessandro Moretti could secure an invitation to the exhibition on the 16th, I supplied him with a high-end, discreet HD camera for filming the photos I believed would interest me most. Alessandro assured me he could provide a detailed and professional appraisal, further bolstered by his ambition to prove himself as a serious contender in the art appraisal world. His final words about wanting to take on a challenge cemented my decision to hire him for parts of Phase 3 and Phase 4 of my plan. To fund this operation, I discreetly liquidated 2 bearer bonds from our safe deposit box, which totaled approximately $25,000. I couldn't recall whether Melissa even knew about them, but she certainly wouldn't now. For additional preparation, I gave my attorney, Margaret Kane, an exhaustive list of our assets, including a recent appraisal of the house. I also documented all of Melissa's jewelry, along with the entire contents of the safe deposit box, minus the bearer bonds. To ensure thoroughness, I provided updated bank statements, credit card information, and details about our retirement plans and brokerage accounts. For a particularly cathartic segment of Phase 4, I carried out an act of symbolic retribution. On the last day of my supposed absence, I slipped into the house while Melissa was at work. Armed with a black marker, I erased my face from every photograph in the dozen or so albums she had compiled over the years. To my astonishment, I realized I appeared in less than 15% of the pictures. Among the photos, I found 2 I hadn't seen before, or perhaps had overlooked. They depicted Melissa, Clara, Sophia, Emily, and, most notably, Marco. Even if I had come across these before, I might have dismissed them as innocent. I made high-resolution scans and photocopies of these photos, carefully marking them with a black arrow pointing to Marco, accompanied by the caption, "The love of Melissa's life." I returned the originals to the albums exactly as I had found them. 2 days after I returned from my trip, Melissa informed me that she would be traveling to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to the afternoon of the 19th. She expressed regret over not being able to spend my birthday with me, but promised to make it up with a romantic getaway to a resort the following weekend. Her tone was honeyed as she assured me, "I'll make it up to you in a way you've never experienced before," sealing the promise with a kiss. I simply played along, masking my contempt for her with a facade of enjoyment. Her forced enthusiasm faltered momentarily, but she covered it with the coy remark, "That's just a sample of what's to come, darling." By this point, I regarded her as nothing more than a fraudulent, opportunistic partner. Phase 5, however, carried the greatest risk, confronting Emily. My instincts told me that of my two daughters, Emily was the more rational and likely to tell me the truth. While both girls inherited Melissa's tendencies, Emily's intellectual bent, studying chemical engineering at Carnegie Mellon University, aligned more closely with my own background in chemistry. Unlike Sophia, who seemed more emotionally attuned to Melissa, Emily had always displayed a stronger connection to the idea of family. Her relative honesty, despite withholding the truth about Melissa's affair, gave me hope that she could still be reached. After dropping Melissa at the airport on the 15th, I drove the 180 miles to Pittsburgh to meet Emily. I called her midway through the trip, and she seemed genuinely excited to hear from me. I suggested a late lunch at a restaurant of her choice, and we settled on a cozy spot about a mile from campus. She picked a secluded booth, where we sat down to talk. After we ate, I gently broached the subject. "There's something very serious I need to discuss with you," I began. Her expression shifted to one of confusion and mild concern. I pressed on, asking for her absolute assurance that she wouldn't disclose anything we talked about, not to Melissa, Sophia, or anyone, until at least a day after my birthday. I raised my hand in the "I swear" position and asked Emily to promise me absolute confidentiality about what I was going to share. She looked taken aback, responding, "Wow, this sounds serious." "Okay, Dad, I promise. I swear," lifting her hand in mimicry and attempting a shaky smile. I then revealed, "I've discovered your mother's involvement with Marco Bellini, and I'm seriously considering divorce." Her reaction was immediate and emotional. "Oh no, Daddy," she gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands as tears welled up in her eyes. I pressed on gently. "The only hope for us as a family is for you to tell me everything you know about this situation. And, Emily, I also need you to take a DNA test." "What?" she exclaimed, her voice rising in distress. She was on the verge of a full-blown meltdown, and I realized the restaurant was far from an ideal setting for this conversation. "Let's step outside," I suggested. "We'll head to my car where we can talk privately." After settling the bill, I paid the waitress in cash and left a generous $120 tip. Once outside, I found Emily waiting, still in tears. She climbed into the passenger seat, and I started the car, but didn't drive. Instead, I turned to her and said, "The survival of our family depends on you being completely honest with me." She cried for a while, her words caught in her throat as she tried to gather her thoughts. I stayed silent, simply watching her, giving her the space to speak. Eventually, she began sharing what she knew. "I didn't realize Mom was involved with Marco, or Uncle Marco as we were told to call him, until I was about 12, she began, her voice trembling. "I mean, I noticed how affectionate they were every time we were in Chicago, especially around Christmas, but it didn't click until later. Sophia figured it out before I did, and made some comments that got me thinking. When I asked Mom, she brushed it off, saying it was an adult matter." Emily paused, her tears flowing freely. "She told me she was in love with two men, you and Marco, and that someday I'd understand. She said you were too insensitive, that's the word she used, to grasp something so complicated. She swore me to secrecy, saying you could never find out because it would destroy the family." She broke down again, sobbing into her hands. When she recovered enough to continue, she added, "I hated it, but I kept quiet because I didn't want to hurt you or the family. I just hoped it would end. When Marco died, I thought maybe things would finally go back to normal." Her voice cracked as she recalled the funeral. "But then, at his casket, Mom made this scene. I confronted her afterward and told her if she didn't stop, I'd tell you everything. She promised me that there would never be anyone else, that she just needed to honor his memory. Her story was gut-wrenching, but I needed more clarity. I appreciate your honesty, Emily, I said softly. But there's one more thing I need to know. What is it? She asked warily. I need both of us to take a DNA test to determine if I'm your biological father. Her face crumpled again. You are my father, she insisted through tears. You're the only dad I've ever known. I nodded. I know I'm your father in every way that matters. But I need to know if I'm biologically your father too. She resisted at first, but after some discussion, she agreed. I handed her a pre-addressed envelope and a sealed DNA test kit. Together, we filled out the necessary forms. I sealed the envelope and dropped it into an express mailbox in front of her. As I drove her back to campus, Emily clung to the hope that I might forgive Melissa. Please, Dad, she said tearfully. Don't let this break us apart. Try to make it work. I can't promise that right now. I replied, my voice firm but gentle. I'm not like your mother. I don't lie. But I will say this. You've done your part to give me hope, and I'll consider it. Before she got out of the car, she hesitated, as if there was more she needed to say. Finally, she added, Mom and Sophia are planning to attend a Chicago exhibition of Marco's works on your birthday. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry for the timing, but Emily's voice trailed off. Melissa explained to Emily that she needed to attend the exhibition because some of Marco Bellini's works, inherited through his will, were being displayed. She also wanted Emily to join her and Sophia, but Emily declined, citing her heavy academic workload. I smiled and casually responded to Emily, I know. Thanks for being honest. After one last hug, she left. Once she was out of sight, I couldn't hold back my tears, realizing that my relationship with Sophia was as lifeless as my marriage to Melissa. Whether my bond with Emily could be salvaged, I still hadn't decided. Unbeknownst to Emily, I had recorded our entire conversation in the car. However, there was something she didn't know, something that would undoubtedly cause her immense pain. It was a critical part of Phase 4 of my plan. The DNA swabs I had sealed in the envelope, claiming they were mine, actually belonged to an Italian janitor who worked in my office building. Over the years, I developed a friendly rapport with him. As part of the ruse, I promised to use the results as a birthday gift for him, explaining it would reveal his heritage. He didn't question why I needed 3 swabs instead of just 1. The results from his ancestry testing showed he was over 80% Italian, with minor contributions from Eastern and Western Europe. This thrilled him, though the real reason I used his DNA was far darker. During testing, heritage data often emerges even when comparing 2 samples. Since Marco Bellini was Italian, I wanted the results to suggest he was Emily's biological father, and if I could orchestrate it properly, Sophia's as well. My ultimate goal was to ensure everyone felt the pain I was enduring. I crossed my fingers, hoping Emily wouldn't reveal any details of our conversation prematurely. When I called her on the 16th and 18th, she assured me she had kept quiet. Her tone was sincere, and since I hadn't heard from Melissa, I believed her. Late on the night of the 16th, Alessandro Moretti emailed me photographs of the significant pieces from the Bellini exhibition. The images cut me deeper than I had expected. As I viewed them, I shook uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. The collection included a series of 10 photographs, each increasing in size and intensity, all demonstrating Bellini's artistic mastery. The series was titled Natalie Amore, Christmas Love. What initially shattered me were the first 2 photographs in the series. They depicted a woman who was unmistakably Melissa, with 2 young girls blurred in the background. Despite the blurring, there was no doubt that the girls were Sophia and Emily, based on their hairstyles, the outfits they were wearing, Christmas gifts from my mother, and their relative ages, around 9 and 11. The second photo in the initial set was especially damning. While the focus was on Melissa, her body partially exposed, she wore an unmistakably sultry expression that could only be described as a come-hither look. The following 3 photographs in the series showed her in progressively fewer clothes, culminating in an explicit final image that left nothing to the imagination. The second set of photos began similarly, with the girls again blurred in the background. This time, Sophia and Emily appeared a few years older. The final 4 images in this set became increasingly provocative, with the last 2 showing Melissa in poses that were not only suggestive but blatantly sexual. The second-to-last image implied she had just been intimate, while the last captured her in a state of post-coital bliss. After throwing up, drinking ginger ale, and crying uncontrollably, I forced myself to look at the photos again. As much as they broke my heart, I couldn't deny that the artistry in the final 2 images was extraordinary. They were arguably the most breathtaking examples of Bellini's artistic mastery I had ever seen, or could ever imagine seeing. Alessandro's report was attached to the email. His message began with an apology. "I'm sorry, I know this will be hard on you." He detailed that the collection's value was estimated between $300,000 and $500,000, with the second-to-last photo alone worth $125,000 to $175,000. He emphasized that art critics and appraisers alike hailed the final 2 images as the pinnacle of Bellini's artistic mastery, with unanimous praise for their unparalleled execution. Alessandro also mentioned that he had spoken with Clara, who confirmed that none of the photographs were for sale at the moment. She directed him to Melissa, identified in Marco's will as the owner of the pieces. According to Alessandro, Melissa had stated, "These works are priceless and won't be sold while I'm alive. Especially the ones where I'm completely exposed. I wouldn't want the public, let alone my husband, to see me like that." That final comment, "especially my husband," stabbed me deeper than I thought words ever could. I sent the digital recording of Emily's words, along with Alessandro's photos and report, to my attorney, Margaret Kane, via email. She contacted me at 7:30 a.m. on the 17th, assuring me that my petition for divorce was firmly justified, citing infidelity. I informed her that a law enforcement officer would serve Melissa the following evening at the gala, alongside a process server who would document the event. Before the papers were served, I dropped off an additional envelope to Margaret to include with the delivery. It was addressed to Sophia and contained a letter from me, a DNA swab from the Italian janitor, a new and used swab, and an express mail envelope addressed to a DNA lab. The letter explained that if there was any hope of a future relationship between us, Sophia needed to swab the inside of her cheek, place it in the envelope with my swab, and send it to the lab immediately. I made it clear that even if she had no interest in maintaining a relationship with me, complying was in her best interest. Failure to do so, I warned, would result in me tying up our finances for years, leaving her unable to pay for tuition, room, board, or any other expenses for the remainder of her junior and senior years at her expensive private college. I emphasized that Emily had already complied, hoping to apply some subtle pressure. I signed the letter, "Your father, Ethan Caldwell." On the evening of the 18th, the process server reported back to Margaret that Melissa and Sophia were all smiles, mingling with the guests at the gala. Around 9 p.m., they appeared confused when handed the envelopes by the law enforcement officer, who promptly left. The process server stayed to document their reactions with photos until he was forcibly removed. The photos, later forwarded to me by Margaret, showed Melissa crumpling to the ground in stages, eventually curling into a fetal position. Sophia initially appeared distraught, but soon became visibly angry, eventually attempting to comfort her mother. Sophia called me the morning of the 19th, filled with outrage over how I had handled serving the papers. My response was curt and direct. "Tell it to someone who cares." Her tone turned sarcastic as she declared she wasn't inclined to take the DNA test. I calmly questioned whether she was afraid of finding out who her biological father was, as opposed to the man who had supported her all these years. "You are my father," she retorted. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not," I replied coolly. "One thing is certain. I've instructed my attorney to freeze all accounts tied to Melissa and me. There will be no money for your education or living expenses moving forward unless you mail that envelope with your cheek swab. And to ensure I can trust you, I'll need a video of you swabbing, sealing, and mailing it." When she tried to accuse me of dishonesty, I interrupted. "Unlike your mother, I don't lie. But you're as unpleasant as she is, and I refuse to waste my time on this conversation. Either comply or consider this the last time we ever speak." With that, I slammed the landline down, one of the few satisfying gestures a cell phone can't replicate. From the 18th to the 21st, Melissa didn't attempt to contact me, likely consoling herself with Clara in Chicago. The local Chicago papers even covered the drama of the gala, featuring a photograph of Melissa, which I suspected was supplied by the process server. Despite my rage, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. On the 22nd, I noticed the envelope I had left taped to the new, reinforced steel front door of what was once our home had vanished. The locks had been changed on all entries, and the note inside read, "To Vile, Ducking Slot. Contact your attorney regarding retrieval of your personal belongings. The sooner we sell this house and end our sham of a marriage, the better. I will resist any attempt by you to re-enter this house until it is sold. Consider for once doing something decent in our farcical relationship. Your formerly clueless ex, Ethan. P.S. The doors are booby-trapped. Any unauthorized entry will result in the destruction of your beloved family photo albums." The booby trap mentioned required a court appearance by both attorneys to negotiate terms for vacating the house. Despite this misstep, we eventually agreed to vacate and immediately put the property on the market, splitting the housing expenses in the division of assets. Melissa tried to haggle during monetary negotiations, but she had no leverage. The photographs she inherited from Marco while we were married were considered joint assets. I demanded 5 of the 10 photos, alternating pics. According to Margaret, Melissa became hysterical at the suggestion, especially after realizing I had doctored the family albums. Her refusal to accept Alessandro's appraisal backfired spectacularly. By insisting on 2 additional appraisers, one neutral and one of her choosing, she increased the valuation of the collection by over $200,000, slashing what she could retain from the settlement. In a last-ditch effort, she offered me 2 of the photos she had chosen, but withdrew the offer when my attorney informed hers that I would accept on the condition that she personally deliver them to a local firing range and witness their destruction. By the time the divorce was finalized, Melissa was left with her personal belongings, half the furniture, a quarter of the house's sale proceeds, and nothing else. No alimony. She narrowly avoided jail time, but that's a story for another day. We agreed to cover Emily and Sophia's college expenses until they graduated, but nothing beyond that. The DNA results confirmed neither was biologically mine. Melissa, furious, insisted the results were wrong, claiming she had only been with me and Marco during our marriage. Her lies unraveled further when I pointed out the stark difference between my Dutch ancestry and the Italian DNA markers that matched Marco's heritage. Throughout our 24-year relationship, Melissa had masterfully deceived me about her supposed love for me. Despite everything that had unfolded, she still insisted on another DNA test, claiming the previous results were incorrect. I informed both Emily and Sophia that no further testing would take place. I clarified that they were adults, the matter had no bearing on the divorce, and my only goal was to know the truth for my peace of mind, and to ensure they knew it as well. I reminded them both that they had witnessed me swabbing my cheek, sealing the envelope, and mailing it. When Emily asked me to consider her mother's request for a face-to-face conversation, I refused. I told her I had instructed my attorney to ignore Melissa's repeated pleas. Why would I want to engage with her at this point? I questioned. Emily pleaded with me to stop using derogatory terms for her mother, expressing her continued love for her despite her flaws. She even asked me, as a favor, to speak with Melissa for just 1 hour. I gently but firmly declined. "I've forgiven you, Emily, and I want us to have a good relationship," I told her. "But there is absolutely nothing that would compel me to have a conversation with your mother." Melissa's mistake. Following my conversation with Emily, Melissa made a catastrophic error. Anticipating that she might attempt something reckless, I had taken precautions. I carried a panic button linked directly to a private security company. One evening, there was a knock on the door of the condo I was renting during the divorce proceedings. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman standing alone. However, what I didn't see were the 2 large men and Melissa standing off to the side. The moment I opened the door, the men forced their way inside, grabbing me before I could react, except to push the panic button. They dragged me to a chair, secured me with ropes, and then Melissa entered. She dismissed the woman at the door and began to speak. Melissa apologized for resorting to such measures, blaming my refusal to meet with her or redo the DNA test. She insisted that the initial results were wrong and claimed she had always loved me, just as she had loved Marco Bellini, asserting that her heart had been big enough for both of us. She acknowledged that reconciliation was impossible, but claimed she wanted to get things off her chest. As she rambled, holding a swab in her hand, it became clear she intended to force a DNA sample from me. My silence enraged her. I refused to speak, meet her eyes, or acknowledge her presence. She instructed the men to pry my mouth open, but before they could, the police arrived in response to the panic button. 3 armed officers burst into the condo, guns drawn. They found me tied to a chair and discovered illegal items in the pocket of one of Melissa's accomplices. Melissa pleaded with the police to let her and the men go, claiming they meant no harm, but the officers arrested all 3. Consequences. The kidnapping incident didn't bode well for Melissa in the divorce proceedings. The judge made it clear that her actions had jeopardized her case, allowing me to secure the favorable division of assets described earlier. In criminal court, Melissa received a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10,000 fine, taken directly from her share of the marital assets. Her accomplices fared worse. One received a year in prison with parole eligibility, while the other, found with illegal contraband, received a 5-year sentence. Aftermath. Phase 4 of my plan extended beyond the divorce proceedings, though I will neither confirm nor deny any involvement in what transpired next. Let's just call it karma. 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I was on a Caribbean cruise with Melody, a stunning 32-year-old divorcee who enjoyed being treated well. Although she bore an unsettling resemblance to Melissa in her youth, I had no intention of pursuing a permanent relationship. She was fun if exhausting. While I was away, Melissa's apartment was broken into. The place was ransacked, with items stolen and destroyed. Most notably, the second most provocative and valuable Bellini photograph of Melissa was taken, while 7 of the remaining 8 Bellini photographs and all the family photo albums were destroyed. Upon my return, I became a suspect. Despite Melissa's accusations that I had orchestrated the break-in, there was no evidence linking me to the crime. My financial records were clean, and the bearer bonds I had cashed long before the divorce were untraceable. 6 months after the investigation began, the police appeared to give up, though Melissa undoubtedly continued to press them. When the statute of limitations expired, I threw a celebration, and it's all finally over party. Attendees included friends, my brother and his family, Emily, her husband, and my granddaughter. I had no relationship with Sophia, wasn't invited to her wedding, and wouldn't have attended even if I had been. I later learned from Emily that Sophia's husband had caught her cheating, and she was in the early stages of a divorce. Melissa gave Emily an ultimatum: sever ties with me or with her. To my surprise, Emily chose me. She had grown disillusioned with Melissa, recognizing her as a pathological liar and resenting her for flaunting her affair with Marco and forcing her children to cover it up. Final truths. One source of friction between Emily and me arose 5 years after the divorce, when I disclosed the truth about the DNA testing. She was initially upset, but ultimately forgave me, just as I had forgiven her for her complicity. The revelation that I was her biological father brought her relief, and I arranged a second DNA test to provide her with additional confirmation.